Good morning, friends. It's been a while. I'm back, and today I want to discuss briefly a topic that has been in the news lately, and that is Elon Musk's move to buy Twitter to make it private and his promise to deliver a better platform in terms of free speech. And my question is simply this: is that going to happen? Is it likely to happen? After all, Elon Musk is one of the richest persons in the world. And we know how rich and freedom of speech go. And also, he does have a history of over-promising and under-delivering in some key areas in his businesses. Though, having said that, I want to make clear from the beginning that I admire his entrepreneurial spirit. I admire his vision on clean energy. And he has delivered to a good extent, even though he overpromises. What he has delivered is impressive. So let's focus for a minute or two on his promise of free speech with Twitter. I want to direct your attention as we start to discuss this issue to this tweet that he published a number of days ago, around the time when he made this move. And here in this tweet, he actually defines what he understands free speech to be. And this is what he says: by free speech, I simply mean that which matches the law. I am against censorship that goes far beyond the law. And then, interestingly, these last two sentences, I think, are key in terms of our effort to understand and predict how free speech will fare under Elon Musk's control of Twitter. He says, if people want less free speech, they will ask government to pass laws to that effect. Therefore, going beyond the law is contrary to the will of the people. So basically what he's saying here is that free speech is really something that has to live within the boundaries of law, of what is legal in any given place or country. And at first sight, that sounds pretty good. I mean, who wants to be outside the law? Who wants to do illegal, illicit stuff, even when it comes to free speech? But I want you to stop for a moment and think. He says here, and I draw your attention again to the third sentence. He says, if people want less free speech, they will ask their government to pass laws to that effect. I want to challenge you, as we have this short discussion here, to think, when was the last time that you can pinpoint to a place, to a people, to a country, to a free such entity, where its people came to the government and petitioned and said, you know what, we actually want less, we have too much free speech, we want less of this thing, please give us less. That should raise at least one little red flag in your mind when you read this thing. But that's not all. I think it pays to go back and think for a moment or two. When we talk about free speech, what is it? Where do we get it from? How do we define this thing in a general sense for ourselves? Take a moment and think. When you think about free speech in the society at large, where you live, whether you live in the United States or elsewhere in the world, what is for you free speech? What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of free speech? Is it that you want to abide with the law? Although I don't encourage you not to do so. I'm just challenging you to think, when you think of free speech, the first thing that comes to mind to most people is that you want to have the freedom to express yourself, right? To be able to say, to bring out through whatever media you choose, whether it's Twitter or writing or conversations or YouTube. You want to be able to bring your ideas, just like I'm doing here now today, and be able to do so in the public space, right? In a civilized manner, in non-offensive manner, of course. But this is the essence of free speech for most people when we think about that. And in fact, if you look at the, for example, at the Declaration of Universal Declaration of Human Rights that the United Nations passed in the 1940s after the Second World War, under number 19. That's what they put there. They say that everyone has or should have the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. So this, in my view, would have been a good starting point for Elon if he wanted to stay true to what most people think about freedom of speech. And if he didn't like this, he could have gone to the First Amendment of the US Constitution that says the Congress should make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. So this is, again, a very, very clear statement that goes along the same. And what really made America great, in my opinion, to a great extent, was precisely statements like this, where even in the preamble of the Constitution, it's recognized that humans are born, they were made by their Creator with some fundamental rights, the right to live, the right to be happy or pursue happiness, the right to hold property and so forth, and the liberty or right to be free, all right? But unfortunately, Elon starts from a different premise, and all he says, by free speech, I simply mean whatever is legal, whatever the law specifies that is freedom of speech. And I just want a single, for a moment, I want you to think of this. And if I would ever have the chance, I would ask Elon this simple question. Imagine you live in Russia today. Imagine you don't like what Russians are doing in Ukraine, which a lot of Russians don't. There's a debate whether those are the majority of Russians or not, but that's beyond the point. Freedom of speech doesn't belong just to the majority. It belongs to whatever minority it is, to a single person. If I'm the only person holding that view and I want to express it in the society, I should be able to do so if there's freedom of speech in that society or on that platform, whatever it is, right? So if you live in Russia today and you want to call what Russians are doing in Ukraine a war, you are not free to do that. You're just saying a word, and it's not an offensive word by any stretch of imagination. I mean, if you see what they are doing in Ukraine. And yet, if you did that, you would end up with 15 years of jail time and possibly other, even worse, consequences. And yet, this is a law that the Russians have passed. So, not being able to express your opinion about that special operation as being truly a war, or maybe even worse, goes against the law. So my question for Elon is, when Twitter will be under his full control, will he stop calling what Russians are doing in Ukraine a war? Will he comply with users in Russia and wherever Russia controls Twitter and censor its own platform so as not to call that a war? And this is just one example from many around the world where Twitter historically, as biased as it is, I'm not here to defend the current status of Twitter. Please understand me. There's a lot of bias in Twitter, in social media, even in Google, in all these platforms. And it's a left-leaning bias. That's beyond question. And I'm not happy with it. But what I'm trying to say, even with this bias, Twitter in particular has played a significant role historically now for more than a decade in many uprisings around the world. Think of, Tunisia, Iran, Egypt. Twitter has been very instrumental in helping people be able to speak up, to express their opinion, their frustration, their opposition to restriction that those governments were putting in place or wanting to keep in place against its own people, its own minorities. So again, defining freedom of speech within Twitter as just what is within the boundaries of the law, it's very disingenuous. In fact, in my view, defining it that way and pretending that people around the world who are restricted in their freedom of speech are doing so because they wanted that is very nefarious. It's a malicious statement. I grew up in a communist society for the first 2 decades and some of my life, where I couldn't say what I think anywhere freely. And to claim that the people I grew up with, we wanted that when our election had been stolen, where our traditional parties were decapitated literally by the communists in the late 1940s and early 1950s when they came to power with the help of the Soviet Union. To claim that we wanted less freedom and therefore we should deal with it is very insulting for me. So I'm very disappointed when I read that from Elon. Now, having said that, I'm not here to say that Twitter will go down the drain. It will be a worthless platform. I hope he wakes up and understands the larger context and the greater value beyond the monetary value of this platform, so as to promote true freedom of speech. But at this point, I am very skeptical that he will do that. And there could be financial interests at play. There could be also his vision on the world. I mean, Elon is known not just as a very smart and business-savvy person, but he also believes that all we are as humans are evolved hydrogen atoms. And our reality where we move in and we exercise our freedom of speech and other things is not the ultimate reality. We are, to quote his own words, in a video game. And so at the end of the day, our freedom within that video game is very questionable if you hold this worldview. But I want to close today by pointing you to a different worldview, and that is, you know that I'm a Christian. So if you go to Galatians, one of the Apostle Paul's writings or letters, he says, you, that is all of us, my brothers and sisters, he says, were called to be free. Now, being created as a free moral entity by an infinitely powerful and loving being, in my view, is the ultimate definition of what freedom is. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of choice. Moreover, even in the Old Testament, you know, a lot of people say the Old Testament is so limiting and the God of the Old Testament is such a cruel person. Read this in Deuteronomy, you know, the 5th book of the Old Testament, the book of Moses, chapter 27. He said, cursed is anyone who withholds justice from the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. And in this statement, my friend, is a definition of the protection, including for the freedom of expression, but not only that, that the disadvantaged, those who are weaker, those who are in a minority are entitled to. And this should be front and center in any definition of the freedom of speech. And I feel very passionate about this, again, having grown up in a society where our freedom of speech, of movement, of expression, of even belief was severely restricted. And along the same lines, and I promise I'll stop here, same Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 4, he says, you know, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor. Don't speak with you know, this whole idea that, you know, oh, freedom of speech is what's legal, and if in a country people want to have more freedom of speech, they should fight for it. It's not my job to help them, right? Quite contrary, we should be true. We should say things as they are. How should I say? Don't use logical fallacies, you know, such as equivocation, which this statement that he makes here is a perfect example of that, you know, where he says, you know, if people want less free speech, this is logical fallacy. This is an equivocation, or even a red herring, which is another logical fallacy, where you use diversion. You use a false argument or even a strawman argument, so to speak, here, where it's a syllogism, where you state a false premise and then you draw this conclusion that therefore going beyond the law is contrary to the will of the people. You know, these are logical fallacies, and there's 2 or 3 in right there in just one statement. In any case, I'm curious what your thoughts are about this whole issue. I really hope that Twitter will continue to be available and a free platform expression in all countries around the world, not just here in the United States. And if you're wondering what my feelings are about allowing the former president to come back on Twitter after he had been banned, I think anybody should be allowed to be there as long as they express their opinions in a non-offensive, civilized manner. Whether I or you or anybody else agrees with them or not, that's a different issue, but they should be allowed to be there. And with that, my friend, I look forward to your reactions, and I'll see you next time. You stay healthy, and you stay wise, and you stay free, my friend.